Hey, welcome to the kitchen today. It's all about black mole. I can't believe I'm really doing this because I have never actually done a video of how you make black mole, because this is the thing that it's almost like the holy grail of Mexican cooking. And for somebody that's not raised with it, not taught by the grandmother how to make their version of black mole, it's really hard to find out exactly how to do it. Reading a recipe, which I did for years and years and years, it didn't give me enough information. And then I started going to Oaxaca every single year and tasting it and talking to people and watching people make it. I did that for 10 years before I actually thought I got it right enough to put on our restaurant menu. And then we haven't taken it off since. So let me show you what I've learned by many, many trial and error attempts to make it and lots of time with Oaxacan cooks. So it's not hard. All you have to do is, first of all, have the patience to do all of the prep. Okay, that is the thing that I will tell you. And I always recommend to everybody divide it into 3 days. You're making black mole, you're not making it for Wednesday night dinner, it's an occasion. So think about it, get your ingredients together, and on day 1, do the basic prep. I'll show you how we go through that. Day 2, you're going to blend and fry the chili paste, blend and the nut mixture and add that to the chili paste and cook that down, and then put some broth in there and simmer it. Straightforward, not hard, but I'm going to show you the tricks that I have learned to doing it well. Then on the 3rd day, it will have mellowed, and you can come back and adjust the seasonings and serve it and arrive at your big event rested enough to really enjoy it, not having done all of that prep in one day or trying to do all that prep in one day. Okay, so the things that are so important about black mole is getting the right chilies. You can't do it without the right chilies. The second thing is you've got to know how to toast those chilies exactly right. That is the most important part of it. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. But let's talk chilies first. Okay, so here what we have is the chili from Oaxaca that everybody talks about and says is essential to making a great black mole. This is Chihuahua chili. Now, you could go to Oaxaca and bring these back, but as far as I have seen, they never show up in my Mexican markets. It's a thin-skinned chili that's almost crisp feeling, like that, okay? Now, if you want to make black mole and you don't have the Chihuahua chilies, I'll tell you what people in Oaxaca do, because Chihuahuas are expensive in Oaxaca and not always in season. So what they'll do is use a guajillo chili. You want to choose the darkest one. Some guajillos are super like cranberry red. Those are probably not the best ones to use, though you can use them. Again, a thin-skinned chili that will substitute for the Chihuahua chili. Okay, second chili that we're going to talk about is Chile Pasilla, or as they call it in Oaxaca, Chile Pasilla Mexicano, the one that comes, say, from Mexico City. It is not the Chile Pasilla Oaxaqueño, the Oaxacan pasilla, which is much spicier and is a smoked chili. And it's not, it's sometimes called the Chile Negro. So I usually write it up as Chile Pasilla Negro. The last one here looks like an ancho chili, but it's not. It's the darker version of an ancho chili. It's a mulatto chili. And since I've got it right here in front of you, I will show you that these are not very good ones, okay? This is what I was able to lay my hands on here. And why do I say that they're not very good? It's because the pasilla here is really nice. It's very flexible. It's got a lot of shininess to it. This is clearly first quality, and it's recently dried. It's not too dried out. This is sort of dull looking, and if I move it like that, it breaks, okay? That's not what I'm really looking for here. I'm looking for a much more supple chili, but it'll work, okay? And sometimes you're gonna find yourself in that same situation where this is what you have to work with. You can do it. You can make a really good black mole out of it. So the first step, of course, is to stem and seed all of the chilies. So with the chihuahuas, that's going to amount to pulling the seed pod out. It may, as you're doing that with one of the chihuahua chilies, they may break into smaller pieces, but what you really want is kind of flat pieces for the toasting part of it. The Chile Pasilla, that's really easy to work with because these are such beautiful pasillas here. I tear them open. Some people use scissors on it or a knife, and you could feel free to do that same thing. I just open them up and let the seeds fall out. Now, this is the point at which you can pull all of these veins out. That will make this black mole less spicy. So that is where all of the heat is in the chilies. But you really do want to get most of the seeds out of here. If there's a stray seed or two, it's not going to be the end of the world. But we're saving these chilies because they're going to add texture and color to this black mole. Okay, so that's a cleaned pasilla. Collecting all the seeds together over here, and let's just see if there's something that we can do with these kind of dried out, crispy looking mulattoes. So I'm going to pull it off at the top like that to open it up. Now remember, I'm going for flat pieces here, so I don't want to make it into too small of pieces. So like that's a flat piece there, and then break that out and open that up. Take another piece of it, shake out the seeds on these, and then just tear it open without tearing it into too many little pieces. Those are going to be harder to toast. But you can see that this is well, it's labor intensive work when you don't have the best quality chilies. Otherwise it goes really fast as it did with the pasilla chilies that you've got there. Okay, I'll meet you back here when all of these are cleaned and we have collected all of the seeds together. Okay, I'm going to take some of these pasilla chiles, and I've got the heavy skillet, 12-inch skillet. You really need to work with a heavy 12-inch skillet. I recommend working with cast iron because that's what most of you will probably have. And I'm going to make one single layer of the chilies, more or less. I mean, I'm not being very meticulous about that, but I'm going to lay them in here. I've got it over medium heat, but I let it heat up for about 10 minutes or so that it was evenly hot. In Oaxaca, this would be a clay griddle that this would be done on. And I'm going to just stand here and turn them until they are deeply toasted. Now, you hear me clearing my throat? It's because I didn't open a door. I didn't open a window. I didn't turn on an exhaust fan, but you have to. Okay, that is super essential in doing this because capsaicin is volatile into the air, and as you start doing the toasting, you're going to want a lot of air circulation in your kitchen. Otherwise, you'll find yourself just coughing and coughing. Now, come down here and look at this. This is really essential. Do you notice how that these have turned to a kind of tobacco color on the inside? They have turned from that completely dark interior to a more tobacco looking color of brown. And we are going to just turn them here until that tobacco color brown darkens to a chocolate brown. And that's what I think, that's the way I describe what is happening here when it's just absolutely perfect for black mole. If you don't toast them enough, or if you try to go too fast and have too high a fire, you will burn them rather than deeply toast them. So this is the moment. And I say I do this in 4 batches, and I don't rush it. No more than medium heat here. I just let this go slowly through the stages. This is way more toasted than any chili sauce I know anywhere else in Mexico. And you may wonder, how did this ever come about? Because basically what we're talking about here is a sort of almost controlled burn, stopping before it actually carbonizes. But how in the world did this ever happen? I have no idea. But when you cook in Oaxaca, and this is a mole that is only from the state of Oaxaca, and it is the king or queen of the moles in Oaxaca. It's the one that you always do for the most special occasions. You watch the people do their toasting and you realize that this really relates to so much else in the culinary culture, that they like things that are toasted dark, and they really, they celebrate a wider variety of flavors than any place else in Mexico. And that includes the flavor of bitterness. And that's what we're doing here. So let's go back down here and look at these chiles. And see, I've still a very tobacco color there. But in this one here, I'm darkening up now, but I'm not clear to the chocolate brown yet. I always say that this takes about 8 minutes, 8 to 12 minutes, and just don't rush it. This is painstaking work, but this is the work of making black mole. Okay, the first round of painstaking toasting is just coming to an end here. Let me just show you, remember that real tobacco brown, now it's gone to chocolate brown. That is what I'm really looking for there. And when I do this with people in Oaxaca, they really just say, you just do it that much. They don't have words to it. So I'm trying to put some words to it so that you can be able to do this and get it just right. Another thing that I notice that is when it's perfect is this. There's a little bit of crispiness on the exterior of the chilies. So you'll notice that like you hear that little crunch there, and that usually is the right thing. Again, that sort of chocolate color on the inside. So I'm going to put all of these over here. They're all ready now, and I just take them out one by one as they're getting toasted, appropriately toasted. And then I've got 3 more batches of this before we come back to the soaking part of it. So starting at number 2. Okay, I've got hot tap water, as hot as it can be, going into the bowl of the chilies, the toasted chilies. I like to put a plate like that on top just so that they are submerged and they will rehydrate evenly. Now, it's 45 minutes that I think is the perfect amount of time to soak them. Too little time soaking and they won't, because these are very deeply toasted chilies. They're more dried out than regular toasted chilies, so they take a little longer to rehydrate. But if you leave them too long, like 2 or 3 hours, you'll just soak out a lot of the flavor and the color into the water. We're going to probably capture some of that by blending these with the soaking liquid. But at the same time, I think 45 minutes is about the right amount of time. And now we're on to toasting the seeds, which you'll find very interesting. Now, all those chili seeds that we saved from the chilies, I want to take 1/4 cup of them. That seems to be the right amount for this. When I've worked with people in Oaxaca, they don't always use all of the chili seeds. Remember, these have been embedded into the veins where all of the heat is. So the exterior of all of these chilies is going to be hot, but you're not trying to add them for heat. You're adding them for depth of flavor and texture. So they're going to go into our skillet here over medium heat, no higher than that. And we are going to just stir them around a little bit for, this again is, you certainly want to have a lot of ventilation in your kitchen. And this will take 4 or 5 minutes for them to darken a lot. And then I'll show you what the last step is to make them less spicy. We're just about there. You can see that they're almost black. That's what we're looking for. And when they get to that black stage, you'll notice that they get just a tiny bit shinier. That indicates that the oil is coming out of them. And so this is the time when I will kind of like put them to the side and in a in kind of a small mound there. I'm going to do this with a culinary blowtorch. I know a lot of you, if you're wanting to make black mole, you've probably made creme brulee and you probably invested in a blowtorch to keep in your kitchen. You can do it with a match as well. But I find this to be the easiest way to catch these guys on fire. So I will just like put it in a spot there, and you'll notice that it catches fire right away. And then you just want to stir them gently around until that flame goes out. What you're doing here is to burn off the oil. And you are also in that same time going to be doing, making them less spicy, because a lot of that oil that you're burning off there. I'm going to catch it again. There we go. I kind of put it out. So I'm catching it again because I knew it didn't burn long enough to really burn that oil out. That'll take a minute or so. Okay, the flame has gone out. I'm going to scrape them into a small bowl. Some people in Oaxaca actually pile the burnt seeds onto a tortilla and then light them and burn the tortilla with the seeds. I don't find that that's the easiest thing to do, especially in my American kitchen. I'm going to put some water on these guys. You hear them sizzle in there. This will just get the ash off of them. We'll let them soak for just a few minutes. And now we go on to the toasting of all the rest of the ingredients, the toasting or roasting. And I will tell you, that stuff is child's play compared to what we've just been through. With the skillet still on medium heat, add the untoasted almonds. They could be skinless or with skin on them. Stir them around for about 7 minutes or so as they darken, richly darken. Then scrape them into the bowl that you're going to put everything else into. Next will go the sesame seeds. Now they'll pop, so stir them around a lot. It'll just take 3 or 4 minutes maybe for them to do. Just don't let them get away from you. You want to darkly toast them, but definitely don't burn them. Toasted peanuts just go into the bowl because they're already toasted or roasted. Then add some freshly rendered lard or vegetable oil. Here I'm using lard because it gives a really traditional flavor to this mole. Slice up the onion and add it to the skillet along with the whole garlic cloves. Now stir all of that around for 7 or 8 or 9 minutes until it's really richly caramelized. You want dark, rich color here. Then scrape the onions and garlic into the bowl with all of the nuts and seeds. Now, if you need to add a little bit more fat to the pan, you want to have enough in here to fry the plantain. So peel that plantain and then cut it into little cubes and put them into the pan and stir those around until they're richly golden brown. Scrape them into the bowl. And then lastly, and you'll need a little fat in the pan to do this too, dump those raisins in there and stir them around. This doesn't really take more than about a minute for them to puff up, and you'll notice that they'll brown nicely, and then scrape them in with everything else. Now put all of those herbs and spices into a mortar or into an electric spice mill and blend them. Not the avocado leaves, those are going to go into the pot later on, just the other herbs and spices. When they're in a powder form, then put them in with everything that's in your nut bowl. Now we're on to the tomatoes and the tomatillos. Of course, when you buy the tomatillos, you gotta take their little papery husks off of them. And then I'm going to roast them. Again, this would in Oaxaca be done on a big flat comal, clay griddle there. But I like to do it under a broiler. So I'm going to slide these into the oven under the preheated broiler, just as close up as you can get to that. And then we'll set up this tray with a tortilla. This is a stale tortilla that you would be using for this, and half of a bolillo or a chunk of baguette that's about this same size. Again, stale is good because what we're going to do is to toast these things darkly. So I'd say pretty much any kind of bread that you have around will work, as long as it's not too fluffy white. You want something with some body, because this is one of the thickeners here for this. So we'll just lay all of this out. And then as soon as that gets broiled, which will take about, I'm going to say about 6 minutes usually, and then we'll flip them over and roast the other side. And then I'll just put these under the same broiler and let them darken. You have to kind of watch those, because they could get away from you pretty fast. So just a nice deep toast on all of these things. Okay, we're down the home stretch of all of this toasting and roasting and sauteing. I'll put the roasted tomatillos and tomatoes and all of their juice into the nut mixture bowl here. The same thing with this toasted bread and tortilla. To that, I'm going to add about 3 cups of broth here. I've got 7 cups measured out, because that's usually what it takes for this. So I'll put about 3 cups of it in there. Yeah, that looks like we hit that on the head. And then just mix all of this. I know it doesn't look like a very attractive mixture here, but when you taste it, every single element here is going to contribute something really important. Now, I've done a pared down version of black mole for you. But when I was doing all of my research to sort of come up with what I thought would be doable for you, I came across recipes that had 40, 45 ingredients. I think this is very close to what we do in our restaurant, and I think it's eminently doable. Okay, so with that up there, let's talk about chilies now. I've got my chili seeds here. I strained them out after a couple minutes there, and those are going to go into that bowl as well. And the chilies themselves, our next step is to determine if the water for the chilies is really bitter. So that's just a taste test here. Our waiting plate will go over to the side here. Now, it's a dark liquid, soaking liquid there. I'm tasting very deeply toasted flavors, but I'm not getting a lot of bitter. I'm not getting a lot of bitter like in tannin bitter, like you would find in some young red wines. I'm not getting that. I think it's good. If it was super bitter, I would just do this next step with water, but then I'll say that the mole won't come out quite as dark a color. So I'm using a high-speed blender here. I will tell you, if you don't have a high-speed blender like this one, what you're really going to end up with is doing the blending maybe 3 or 4 batches. But again, this is just an exercise in patience from the very beginning to the very end of it. So I'm going to use the tongs. With this blender jar, I have to do 2 batches of them. And once I have blended them with some of this soaking liquid, just enough to come up to about right there on them, not to cover them completely, then I will strain it into another bowl, and we will be ready to do the other really important step, which is frying down the chili paste until it's really the darkest, almost black color you could imagine. I'm going to tip off some of this liquid here. And that should do it almost up to the top there. And now we start the blending process. You can tell by the color of it that we really did a good job on the toasting of those chilies, because this is that really, really sort of bitter chocolate color. And I'm using just a medium mesh sieve. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say one thing. I put just enough of the soaking liquid in here so that everything went through the blades, but it's the minimum amount possible. That's really important. If it sticks in here, add more, of course, if it's not blending everything. If you're not seeing that sort of tornado of chili puree going through the blades, then you don't have enough liquid in it. But you don't want to put too much in here because that next step of cooking down the chili puree will take a lot longer. So I'll scrape all of this in here. I do want to show you what it's like when what I'm going to get out of here before I blend the second batch of the chilies. Okay, I started the blender at a very medium speed, and then I kicked it up to the highest speed of the blender and let it go for several minutes. And you know, it did a really good job. That's all the chili skin that I'm getting out of here. That was the unblended part of all of this. But so now I've got to go through the second batch of the chili puree. Second batch of chili has been pressed through our sieve here. Just again, very little of that. I'll set that to the side. And now we're going to go set up here. I've got a pot. Now you want one that holds about, I'm going to say anywhere from 8 to 12 quarts. If you have a 12-quart stock pot that's pretty heavy, then you could do this cooking in it. Actually, the bigger the pot, the easier it will be, because you'll see in a minute that there's some spattering that goes on here. I've got a spatter screen, just one of those inexpensive spatter screens, because I find that they come in really in a handy way. I've had this pot. This is cast iron that's got an enamel coating on it, which works really well for this. Of course, in Oaxaca, you would be doing it in one of those cazuelas that are made out of earthenware, glazed on the inside, unglazed on the outside. And you would probably be doing this step outside on an anafre, which is a brazier that has some charcoal in it, and you would just nestle the pot right in the charcoal. I've got this over medium-high heat. I'm going to put 1/4 cup of the fresh rendered pork lard in here. Now this may look like a lot when you're measuring it out. I know what it's supposed to look like in the pan, so that's what I'm doing here. But you want enough fat here to do this frying of the chili really well. And that's really important whether you're using oil or lard for this. You want to make sure that you have a really nice coating. I'm going to say it's about 1/8 of an inch thick all over the bottom of this pot. And then I'm going to add I want to make sure that the the fat is hot enough that I hear a sharp sizzle. And then I'm going to put it in here. It will probably start spattering right away, but that spattering will kind of go away for a second as this is coming up to temperature. And this is the point at which you just stand here again. This is really an exercise in patience, because you want to stand here and stir this. And I'm going to say almost constantly for the next 8 to 12 minutes until it's really, really thick, almost to the consistency of like a tomato paste, if the tomato paste was hot. If you don't stir it, all this won't happen as fast. But I say just keep after it. Stand here and stir it and stir it and stir it, and it will reduce and thicken. This is one of the most critical steps. The toasting of the chilies is the other really critical step, but the cooking down of the puree is super important. Then once that's finished, we'll be on to blending the nut mixture and adding that to this. You can see what I mean about splattery here, but I got the splatter screen to minimize as much as I can. It's very thick now. If this were to cool off, it would be almost the consistency of tomato paste. Some cooks like to cook it in a little bit more fat than I did, and they will say that you have to wait until the fat separates out on the top. I don't think that's absolutely necessary for this, but you will hear that in a lot of the recipes. I'm going to turn it down now, and then we're going to go over to the blender and start the next blending. Okay, our other mixture, and it really does contain a wide variety of things, is in the blender. If your blender's not this large, of course, you'll have to do this in a couple of batches. And I just want to make as smooth a puree as possible. If it gets caught where it's not going completely through the blades, I will add a little bit more broth to it. Okay, that was a lot of blending there. Now, this particular blender comes with this pressing stick in there, and I don't know of another blender that has it, but it does help me to keep everything moving in there because it's a fairly thick mixture. Of course, I'm going to press it through a strainer now. Again, a medium mesh one, not a real fine strainer here. And I will need to have a spatula to get it through. You want to run the blender as long as you can stand it until this gets to be a very smooth mixture. Yet we always strain it in order to get any pieces out that haven't blended well. Sesame seeds are pretty hard, so they're the last things that will blend up smoothly, and you may catch some of them in your strainer. Okay, not too much here. Again, just like a tablespoon of stuff. Now I'm going to I want to get all of that off of that spatula there. And then I'm going to remove our spatter screen and add this to the pot. My oil is beginning to separate out there, as I had talked about before. Stirring constantly through that first section not only makes it go faster, but it also makes sure that nothing sticks and burns on the bottom, which I think is really important. Okay, all of that is in the pot now. I had turned this down after I had reached the right consistency in the black chili paste that we have here. Now I've added the other mixture to the pot, and I'm just going to turn it back up to medium-high, stand here and stir it again for about 10 minutes or so. I actually didn't quite get the right number on the chili puree. I said about 10 or 12 minutes, and it really took us 15 to get that to cook down. And you'll see that our mixture lightens up a lot now. But in that cooking of the chilies down, what you're doing is to increase sweetness, which is really important in this dish, and to push to the back all the bitterness. The only way that you can make that happen is cooking in fat like that, stirring it. I've seen some of the commercial places that do the chili pastes or the mole pastes, and they have great big cauldrons that have automatic stirrers in them that just go round and round until they've reduced their chili puree to a chili paste. And knowing full well that that's the only way to get that really authentic, delicious, balanced flavor in a mole. So we'll stir this again now for about 10 minutes as it thickens too and darkens, but this is not as important as that first addition was. Okay, our gurgling pot of black lava here is ready. I'll take this off so that you can take a look at it down in here as I stir it. But it is almost exactly the same color as the chili puree was, but you see that it is, so I got to get it covered. I'm going to add the rest of the broth, the 4 cups of broth, to it, and then just stir that in. I can get rid of the spatter screen now, but you do have to know that I have been wiping this up, that even that spatter screen wasn't containing all of it as we're going along now. Okay, so we're kind of done. We have the hard seasoning part to go. We got simmering and then seasoning. So let me just move that over there. Two last ingredients that are going to go into this pot for the simmering phase of it. I've got a spatter all over there. I always recommend that you wear something the color of this while you're doing this, because you can see that I've got spatters all over my white chef's jacket. We've got the Mexican chocolate just chopped up there. the leaves, the avocado leaves. Now I just put these into the dry skillet right at the very beginning and toasted them a little. How do you know when they're done? I say they're done when they'll give off just the slightest wisp of smoke, but really they fill the kitchen with this beautiful aroma of toasting leaves. Okay, so those are just going to go in there. I'm going to poke them down in there, stir the chocolate in, it'll just dissolve. This is Mexican chocolate. I've used the Taza brand a lot. I think that's a really good quality version of that, heavier in chocolate. But now I'm going to come over here. Actually, I'm going to move it back over closer to where we are because we have to talk about consistency and so forth. I have another batch of black mole, if you can believe this. We've been through, this is the second time through this whole thing. And I've got this batch of black mole, which has been simmering over here all the way through. I would say that it's not, it's a little bit, you can see a little bit of fat has separated out on top. That's fine. You can stir it right back in. I'm going to put that down and I've turned it off. I just had this simmering on the lowest possible, but I wasn't stirring it very much, so you can see some little pieces down there. Now, I don't think it has enough liquid in it. We could be using, I'm just using chicken broth for this. You could add more of the chicken broth, but what you have evaporated is water. So unless you want the chicken broth to come out as a very big player in this, I would thin it back out with a little bit of water here. So just stir that in until you get it the consistency of what I would call kind of cream soup. Some people like it thicker, some people like it thinner. You can make that choice on your own. Now I've already seasoned this one, but I'm just going to pretend that we haven't seasoned the other one. And so let's talk about this. What we would have over here, I'll use this same wooden spatula to stir this guy over here. So I've got this kind of over medium heat now. When it comes to a simmer, I would turn it down. I'd put the lid slightly askew on this. And after a couple of hours, I would be ready to season it or to let it go for even longer. I will say the longer you let it simmer, the better this will be. And then if you will cool it down and put it away in the refrigerator, come back to it in a day, maybe even 2 days or 3 days, it will have integrated the flavors so much better. That's why I always recommend making it one day and serving it the next. And if you're really organized doing all the prep on one day, then making it on the second day and serving it on the third or fourth. It doesn't really matter. And I know all of you are going to ask me, can you freeze this? Absolutely, you can freeze it. When you defrost it, it sort of looks broken. Don't worry, just put it in a blender. It'll come right back together so it freezes really, really beautifully. Okay, so say this has already simmered for a couple of hours and it's time for me to do the seasonings. I will start off by giving it a good amount of salt to start with. This probably is not going to be the right amount of salt, but at least I can get started here with a couple of teaspoons of salt in there and then go from there. Now, what I want you to do is to start to taste, because this is going to be, for a lot of you, a brand new experience. But say I put a couple of teaspoons of salt in here and I stir that in and then I give it a taste. You're not going to be terribly impressed with it at this point because, and I also have to say, this depends on how salty your chicken broth was. If the chicken broth wasn't salted at all, I'd probably start with a tablespoon of salt in this to start with. But I knew I was working with salted chicken broth. So I'm going to taste it. And it should have a kind of complete savoriness to it at that point. Of course, I'm tasting that this hasn't simmered very long either, but it should have this real rich savoriness. And so I like to add salt first to get it to that place where if I was thinking about this was a pot of chili, say, would it be at that level of saltiness? And then I'm going to bring out all the other flavors by adding something sweet. Now, some people will work with really rich stock, especially pork stock, has a tendency to go real sweet, and so you could just add that all the way through. cook with that and have the dilution be all of that. And that could give a nice flavor. But mostly people in Oaxaca will add sugar to it at this point. Now that may seem like the wrong thing to do because most of us that come from the European tradition, you don't ever put sweet into savory food, or if you do, it's considered cheating. This ain't cheating. This is really essential in getting the balance of things right. And you'll notice it when you start with this. So I've got this is a 1/3 cup measure. I'm going to start with 1/4 cup, so not quite full on this 1/3 cup of measure. And I'm going to put that in here to start with. Those of you that are averse to sugar, you could use agave syrup. That would be sweet. It'll give a different texture to it and a slightly different flavor. I wouldn't suggest something like honey because that will take over this pot. So now I've got my 2 teaspoons of salt, which actually were just about right for me. I've got 1/4 cup of the sugar in here. And by the way, I am also using organic sugar here, which is always a tan color, and that tan actually equals flavor. It's a much richer flavor. It's not as devoid of flavor as white sugar is. It's like a whole new world of flavor. All of a sudden I can taste those chilies. The plantain and the raisins, they start to come out. Even the fruitiness of the tomato will start to come to the surface. So that's where I would sort of leave this for a while. And that is one of the hardest things to get right. But if you're making it according to these directions, probably you will get to that 1/4 cup of sugar and 2 teaspoons of salt in the ballpark. That's not going to be enough to actually serve this because those are going to kind of, the salt and sugar kind of integrate into the flavor of this. And so tomorrow, or maybe even in a few hours, this will need a little bit more of both of those things. But right now, I'm kind of happy with where it is because going from salty only to sweet, there was an explosion of flavors, and you need to add sweetness for those things to come out. Just the way you need to add salt to something for the savory flavors to all come out. So there's your pot of black mole. As patience requiring as it is, you make this the way you would make any kind of special dinner for a special occasion. And I hope that you guys will tackle this. I'm not going through all the way to serving it with something, but I am going to show you a way that you could serve it. So give me just a second to get ready for that. Of course, black mole is the star of the show here. And a lot of times in Oaxaca, they will serve it with poached chicken. I like to use grilled chicken. You could do grilled chicken breasts or legs or thighs, whatever appeals to you. Some people, of course, like to do turkey that they poach. I actually, if I'm going to do turkey, will oftentimes put the turkey in turkey breast, just a boneless, skinless, boneless turkey breast with the skin still on it, and just put that into the pot and poach it directly in here. That's anathema to people in Oaxaca, but I think it works really, really quite well. I've got some pork loin roast here, which I think is really, really delicious with it. If you were to come to our restaurant, Topolobampo, we would do a seared piece of Wagyu ribeye to go with the best sauce in the Mexican repertoire, perhaps with a little piece of seared foie gras beside it. And before you recoil completely, if you've never tasted good black mole with foie gras, there's no reason you shouldn't. I'll tell you, it's a really amazing, amazing experience. But this is the star of the show, so you don't really decorate it up with too much stuff. There's never going to be sour cream and guacamole going on this. In fact, the people in Oaxaca don't even put nuts and seeds over the top of it like they do up in Puebla, where sesame seed always has to go on it as one of the ingredients here. Now, I tasted this mole again just while I was cutting up this roasted pork loin. And boy, this is the one that we made before. And all of the sweetness had sort of gone hiding. So I had to add more. When this is finished, it should have a slightly sweet edge. Don't think that that's going to be imperceptible. It's going to have a slightly sweet edge. So I added a little bit more of the the sugar to it. I just use the sugar here. And I'm just going to make a beautiful plate presentation, but a very simple one here. And I believe that this is what this sauce deserves, because as dark and mysterious as it looks, I will say its flavor is so incredibly dynamic that you certainly don't want to take the focus off of it in any way, shape, or form. So just putting some pork roast like that on there. Got a few sprigs of flat leaf parsley to kind of lay on here willy-nilly. Just kind of sprinkle them around. And I honestly think that that's kind of all it needs. But I hope that this gives you an idea of ways that you could possibly serve this beauty. It is so spectacular. I can't wait to hear what you guys come up with, and I know that you'll be sharing your photos of the black mole that you have made, because you guys are just so amazing in your determination to master the real Mexican kitchen, and I am honored to be able to share it with you. So thank you so much for sticking with me all the way through from the beginning to the end of black mole. Have an adventure.